My brother's actions caused significant distress in my life. I later discovered that he had impregnated my wife and that our son was not biologically mine. He has since attempted to reconcile with me following the disownment of our parents and the distribution of their $2 million inheritance. I have a younger brother named Caleb who has consistently exhibited animosity towards me. Some may speculate that this was driven by jealousy. However, this is inaccurate. My brother was the recipient of undue attention and affection from our parents, which contributed to his feelings of resentment. To provide context, my mother has consistently prioritized my younger brother's needs and treated him with exceptional care. Consequently, he has developed a sense of entitlement and a perception of being favored. In our family, the mother would prepare meals, wash clothes, and even assist with homework for the younger sibling. I was expected to help out because of my familial relationship, but I did not receive the same courtesy. I eventually came to accept this unequal treatment, perhaps because I was quite independent. Perhaps my accommodation of his needs and wants without reciprocation contributed to this imbalance. He never offered to help when I needed it and only reached out to me when he wanted something from me. As a quiet, introverted child, I enjoyed studying and keeping to myself. While I was the quiet, introverted child who liked to study and keep to myself, he was exactly like our dad, rough and loud. I also tend to be straightforward and honest, not sugarcoating things and saying it like it is. As a result of my childhood, I believe my mother might have developed some negative perceptions of me. He was everyone's favorite in our family, and I did not mind that. However, when we were growing up, trouble arose when he found a way to bully me or mock me for being different from him. He would mock me for height or the fact that he would surreptitiously enter my room and attempt to peruse my diary, with the intention of citing any content that he deemed inappropriate to my mother. I would respond with indignation and convey my disquiet to my parents, who would, in turn, dismiss my concerns as trivial. He perpetrated further transgressions, including the near destruction of my glasses and the introduction of noxious substances into my food. On one occasion, he even placed small stones in my cereal, which I was fortunate to discover before they could cause harm to my teeth. I informed my mother of these incidents. However, she dismissed the incident, stating that it was simply part of the dynamic between siblings. When we would argue, Caleb would deliberately target my insecurities. Given that we attended the same school, he was aware that I was facing bullying from a few individuals. Instead of offering me support, he would align himself with those who had been bullying me. He would join in on the name-calling, such as labeling me as an ugly loser or a hairy monkey, and encouraging the bullies to physically harm me. He believed that I was a mere failure. On another occasion, we had a verbal altercation ensued, the specifics of which I cannot recall. However, it was likely a trivial matter. At its conclusion, he advised me to take my own life. While other insults I had endured were relatively easy to brush off, this one had a particularly profound impact on me. At the time, I was grappling with significant mental health challenges. I have since made significant strides in my recovery. However, it was still distressing to hear that my own brother held such a view of me, particularly given the lack of support from my parents. My mother even admonished me for playing and irritating my father. The situation continued to deteriorate. There was a time when my brother attempted to burn my hair during our high school years. My mother sided with him, claiming that he was merely playing. However, my father eventually took my side, pointing out that they had significant underlying issues. He even threatened to call the police on Caleb. This was a pivotal moment for my brother, as it marked the first time he had been reprimanded for his actions. He was visibly taken aback, and my father continued to express his concerns. He informed him that he had reached a point where his behavior was unacceptable and that he needed to start respecting his older brother. Later, my father entered my room and spoke with me. I had never anticipated that my father would offer his support to Caleb, given that he had consistently told Caleb, while he was growing up, that the two of them were similar. My father explained that he had been patiently waiting for years for Caleb to mature, hoping that he was simply an immature child. However, he was gradually coming to the realization that Caleb was becoming a significant bully. When I heard my father say this, I felt a sense of this validation was the impetus for my emotional breakdown. I disclosed to my father the entirety of Caleb's actions against me over the years, including instances of bullying at school. My father was taken aback by the extent of my experiences. The following day, he spoke with the school principal to inform them of the potential consequences for my bullies should they persist. Later that evening, my father enrolled me in MMA at our local gym, emphasizing the necessity for me to confront and overcome the challenges posed by bullies in my life. I acknowledge that this was a pivotal moment in my journey of personal growth. A child with an intellectual disability attempting to learn self-defense would have been a source of amusement to observers. However, as with all aspects of my life, I am dedicated when I set my mind to a task. I allocated time for my studies so that I could exercise daily and attend MMA classes. I do not intend to boast, but this approach had a profound impact on my life and physical development. One day, Caleb was at it again. He had stolen my pocket money, which we had been saving to help our parents with household chores. I had been saving my money for quite some time, and Caleb had managed to take it. Caleb had stolen my pocket money, which we used to save for future expenses. I observed him taking the money and, upon realizing what he had done, confronted him. I informed him that stealing was wrong and demanded the return of my money. In response, Caleb laughed and taunted me, suggesting that I could only rely on my father for assistance. I am uncertain as to what prompted me, but I struck Caleb with a resounding punch to the face. He was momentarily stunned and fell backward onto the ground. I then retrieved my money from his trouser pocket and threw him back down. He began to weep loudly, in a manner reminiscent of a juvenile. It was somewhat amusing to observe a young man of teenage years exhibiting such a display of emotion. However, my mother promptly emerged from the domicile, seeking to assist her child and ascertain the cause of his distress. Upon learning of my altercation with Caleb, she initially expressed surprise, then proceeded to admonish me. She advised me that, in my capacity as an elder sibling, should exemplify more commendable conduct for Caleb's benefit. Nevertheless, Caleb appeared to derive pleasure from witnessing my reprimand. My mother also conveyed her concerns to my father regarding my physical aggression. Caleb stood up and stated that I needed to be controlled. My father then requested that both of us provide an explanation. I informed him that Caleb had stolen the money that I had worked hard for and saved, while Caleb attempted to justify his actions by stating that he needed the money for a date and that, as my brother, I should help him. However, my father told Caleb that he was fortunate that I had merely punched him for stealing my money because anyone else would have called the police on him. My father continued to tell Caleb that he had no right to take others' things. Caleb was displeased with this response and began to display disruptive behavior, likely seeking our mother's support. However, our father remained steadfast, and upon realizing that I would not be punished for physically defending myself, Caleb verbally lashed out, expressing intense animosity towards me. He then retreated into his room, effectively isolating himself from me. This incident marked a turning point, as Caleb came to recognize that his previous tactics of intimidation and coercion were ineffective. Even our father, who had previously been inclined to condone Caleb's actions, seemed to have reached a point of saturation with his antics. Despite his inability to physically harm me, he would attempt to verbally abuse me when he knew our parents would not be present. As he grew older, his behavior became increasingly hostile and volatile. Each year, he seemed to become angrier and more prone to outbursts. If I approached him to inquire about something, he would simply ignore me and walk away, muttering insults like nerd or loser. If he wanted to communicate with me, he would only do so through our mother, who would relay his messages. I would inquire of my mother why Caleb could not simply communicate his needs directly to me. She would urge me to be more understanding. I was uncertain whether this was merely a phase of puberty and that I should simply wait it out, or whether he truly held ill will towards me. I had previously been able to cope with his verbal abuse, but it reached a point where I felt the need to leave the family home to avoid further confrontation. I would frequently approach my mother, requesting that she intervene. Despite my mother's willingness to facilitate a discussion, she consistently declined, citing a lack of interest in becoming involved. I even sought her perspective on the reasons behind Caleb's behavior, but she avoided the question. Eventually, I departed for my dream university, having earned the qualifications for a scholarship. My father hosted a celebration for me, and my mother expressed pride in my achievements. However, Caleb remained detached and unresponsive, barely acknowledging my accomplishments. The day I left for university was a complex blend of I was eager to embrace the future and relieved to leave behind the toxic environment of my childhood home. My first few months at university were a period of immense personal growth. I forged new friendships, found joy in my studies, and began to construct a life separate from the oppressive atmosphere I had experienced during my formative years. The constant fear of Caleb's verbal attacks dissipated, and I felt a profound sense of tranquility. I began dating my future spouse, Karen, during our second year at university. We met through a mutual friend at a social gathering, and our connection was immediate. From a religious family, having children without being married was considered unacceptable. However, we discovered that she was pregnant during our final year at university, which prompted us to marry as soon as we graduated. Our wedding was a small but peaceful ceremony. Our parents were pleased for us, and we enjoyed ourselves at the wedding. At that moment, I believed she was the love of my life. I always held the mindset that I wanted monogamy in life, one woman to come home to and be with for the long haul. Despite over the course of my marriage, I was approached by numerous women. I consistently declined their advances, as I was content with my marital status. Karen represented my ideal partner, and I was reluctant to jeopardize our relationship. However, there were two instances when I discovered her infidelity. The first involved an intermittent affair with her married colleague that spanned several years. The second involved a brief romantic involvement with an ex-partner from her high school days, during which she traveled abroad to visit her family. Some might view my actions as misguided or naive. In retrospect, I am unable to deny my own role in these events. Following a period of separation, I ultimately decided to forgive my wife. I was determined not to raise my child in a broken home and was convinced that we could overcome the challenges we faced. At the time of the incident with her coworker, we were relatively young, so I attributed it to youthful mistakes and a lack of foresight. Things appeared to be improving, and I was willing to give her the benefit of the doubt. However, I struggled with trusting her fully and attempted to push aside my doubts. I recognized that if I chose to forgive her, I had to do so. It was necessary to work towards moving past the incident and starting with a clean slate. 4 years have elapsed since the second instance of infidelity, during which time I have come to believe that I made the correct decision by allowing my wife the opportunity to demonstrate her desire to remain in our marriage. Karen appeared to have undergone a transformation, and we were genuinely pleased with the plans we had set in motion for the future of our family. However, 3 months ago, my reality was once again shattered by yet another incident, which in my mind was far more egregious than the others, when she revealed that she had been engaging in sexual intercourse with another individual. For a considerable period of time, she proposed the possibility that our son might not be biologically hers. Upon hearing these words, I experienced a profound sense of shock, betrayal, and disbelief. I initially struggled to fully comprehend the gravity of what she had just revealed. Over the following days, I attempted to inquire about her rationale for maintaining such a significant secret and why she had chosen to do something so detrimental. However, her demeanor remained detached and indifferent, as though she was not particularly affected by the pain she had caused. Her responses were evasive and lacked clarity. The encounter left me with a plethora of unanswered questions. It was a surreal and painful moment, confronting the shattered trust and the uncertainties about my own family. I continued to inquire of Karen the truth, as I felt entitled to know the father of the child, having been the primary caregiver for our son since his birth. Ultimately, she conceded that it was Caleb. My eyes widened in shock as I demanded clarification. This is when Karen revealed how she and Caleb had become friends after I had introduced Karen to my. She remained with our family until the New Year's holiday. I recall Caleb, who was typically aloof, was cordial and affable towards her. I was gratified, as I did not wish to create an unwelcoming atmosphere. She sought acceptance into my family, so she spent considerable time with my mother. She observed that Caleb and I were not particularly close and inquired about the nature of our relationship. I eventually divulged to her the history of my interactions with Caleb and informed her of the challenges we faced in repairing our bond. Since he was unable to move past his feelings, Karen was able to comprehend his situation. However, she began including Caleb in our activities, perhaps with the hope that our mutual exclusion would eventually lead to a reconciliation. When we went to watch a movie, she would invite Caleb, and we would have to watch whatever movie Caleb wanted to watch. During this period, Caleb and I did engage in sporadic conversation, which represented a notable improvement compared to his years-long practice of giving me the silent treatment. I do recall instances when Karen and Caleb would engage in leisure activities together. They engaged in video games together, but I did not consider this a significant development. Karen informed me that Caleb had opened up to her about his struggles and his recent breakup with his former girlfriend. He appeared to be emotionally vulnerable with her, and they formed a friendship. She stated that he would occasionally engage in harmless flirtation with her when I was not present. Eventually, things progressed to a point where she could no longer control her emotions. I closed my eyes as the image of my wife and brother engaging in sexual intercourse nearly caused me to vomit. She expressed feelings of guilt following this incident. Subsequently, she elected to return to her familial residence, which was indeed the case, as my romantic partner had abruptly informed me of her intention to return home, despite my expectation that she would be spending the new year with me. I endeavored to persuade her to remain, but she was resolute in her decision to depart after the holidays. Once our academic pursuits resumed, she reverted to her customary cheerful demeanor, and I remained unconcerned. 2 weeks later, we were informed that she was pregnant. Karen subsequently disclosed that she was uncertain as to the paternity of the child. Or Caleb's. She lacked the means to obtain evidence because I was already providing support. She perceived me as a more reliable sibling, so she elected to remain with me. This led to our marriage. I experienced a profound sense of devastation. The son I had loved and spent innumerable hours with might not be mine. I inquired if she had been engaging in sexual intercourse with Caleb during the recent period. She nodded affirmatively. Karen informed me that she and Caleb had maintained contact due to their strong connection. They would discreetly meet. Hotels were the venue of choice when she would lie to me that she was working overtime. She informed me that half of her business trips were romantic getaways with him. I queried Karen as to why she would even be married to me if she truly desired my brother. Karen replied that she was reluctant to be the one to break off a marriage. She observed that I was a commendable father to our son and that she had remained with me thus far. She stated that she had made a mistake and was unsure of when to cease. I informed Karen that I was gratified that she had divulged the truth. I was preparing to relocate. Karen began to weep and implored my pardon, stating that I was expected to berate and reproach her, yet I remained composed, contemplating my subsequent actions. I remained silent as I proceeded to my cupboard and began packing some of my belongings. Karen reiterated that if I truly loved her, I should endeavor to reconcile, emphasizing that missteps are inherent to marriage. Upon realizing that I was not going to relent, she altered her approach, expressing concern for the impact on our son. She proceeded to cite the potential consequences of divorce and the detrimental impact of a broken home on children. I then brought up the possibility of my being the child's biological father, which prompted her to become visibly emotional and accuse me of being cruel. I informed her that I had been present for the child's birth and had consistently supported him since then. It appeared that my wife believed there was no way I could desire a separation from our marriage. I acknowledged that I might have contributed to this perception by allowing certain issues to go unaddressed in the past. While I did possess affection for my wife, I realized that it was largely driven by the assumption that we were. A son was born of the union, and the couple had been together since college. Karen continued to assert that reconciliation was still possible and that they could work things out, but I found it difficult to believe and felt that I had no further patience to expend on her. My trust in her was severely eroded, and her words felt hollow, even if I forgave her. I could never forget that she had engaged in sexual intercourse with my own brother. I have always believed that individuals can err and be forgiven because we are all imperfect beings. However, this transgression went beyond a certain limit. I left her in a state of distress at the doorstep and checked into the following day. I proceeded to inform my parents of the details of my wife's infidelity with Caleb, including the duration of their secret relationship. Their expressions reflected a profound sense of disbelief. My mother, in her characteristic manner, initially attempted to defend Caleb, suggesting that the allegations were implausible given her perception of him as a person. However, I was determined to uncover the truth and requested that my parents remain silent while I spoke with Caleb in their presence. I instructed them to refrain from making any comments or gestures that might disrupt the conversation. This is how I could expose Caleb's true character. I wanted him to believe that it was just a private conversation between us, so that he could hopefully let his guard down. When Caleb picked up, I laid it on thick and confronted him with the revelation of his affair with my wife. Initially, he denied it vehemently and refused to accept it. Then, when I told him that Karen had admitted to everything, he started to blame Karen, labeling her as characterless. He told me that it was not his fault if women were attracted to him and that he was the better. I informed him in a firm tone that I intended to expose him publicly. Caleb then mocked me, stating that no one would believe me and that he was above reproach. I refuted his arrogance and thanked him for confirming the truth, given that our parents had heard everything. Caleb then became silent and attempted to explain himself. In an attempt to salvage his image, he stumbled over his words, and my mother, still grappling with shock, demanded an explanation from Caleb. He attempted to justify his actions, blaming everyone else but himself and desperately trying to shift the blame onto Karen. I could see my mother, who had previously been her favorite, become increasingly protective of her son. In that charged moment, the son experienced a combination of disappointment and anger. He felt a peculiar sense of vindication for years, enduring Caleb's torment. Now, the truth had emerged, and the roles had been reversed. Caleb was the one who was exposed, with his actions laid bare for all to see. As Caleb's words faltered, the father, who was usually reserved in his expressions, conveyed a profound sense of disappointment. He requested that I pass him the phone and proceeded to admonish Caleb. He began by expressing his disapproval in a tone laden with disapproval. He asserted that Caleb's actions constituted not merely a betrayal of his brother but also a betrayal of the family unit. Caleb had engaged in sexual intercourse with his brother's wife, a transgression that persisted even after their marriage. He further elaborated that Caleb's actions had resulted in irreparable damage to the trust that had been previously established within the family. He emphasized that he had instilled in both of them a profound sense of value for family loyalty and decency, and that Caleb's actions had starkly contrasted with these values. "This is contrary to everything I have attempted to instill in you." He paused, allowing the gravity of his words to resonate with Caleb. "The disregard for your brother's feelings, the lack of respect for the sanctity of his marriage, these actions are unacceptable. You have not only caused him pain but also undermined the fundamental bonds that unite us as a family. I feel as though I and your mother are responsible for your current state, and we will no longer tolerate your behavior. Effective immediately, I am severing all ties with you. From the college funds that I established for you, you can determine the amount required for your university fees. I will also no longer provide financial support for your lifestyle. You believe that engaging in sexual relationships with married women makes you a more masculine individual. However, I will observe the consequences of your actions when you are no longer dependent on my financial assistance." Despite my initial inclination to express my frustration, I maintained composure throughout the proceedings. Witnessing my father's disciplinary actions against Caleb was a profound sense of vindication. I had previously exposed as my mother's true nature was revealed, and it was evident that she had underestimated the consequences of her actions. Caleb continued to protest, attempting to justify his behavior, but my father ended the call, effectively silencing him. My mother approached me and embraced me, expressing her support amidst the family turmoil. She apologized for not believing me, and I felt a sense of understanding and solidarity. A year-long process ensued. The previous version of myself would have been unable to envisage this moment, vindicated and embraced by my mother. Subsequently, my father assisted me in finding a suitable lawyer to facilitate my divorce from Karen. She and her legal counsel attempted to gain an advantage by requesting alimony, given that I was the higher earner. However, the circumstances of her infidelity ultimately favored me. Additionally, a paternity test was conducted for my son, which yielded the desired result. The paternity test results were definitive: Caleb was indeed the father of the child. The news was difficult to accept, and it was more distressing than when Karen informed me of her infidelity. I was enraged that my son did not belong to me. However, I believe that God works in mysterious ways, and I decided to remain strong throughout this ordeal. Karen pleaded with me I was advised to maintain contact with my son, as he should not be held responsible for the circumstances that had arisen. However, I found myself unable to interact with him. He evoked memories of Caleb, which I found distressing. Following the dissolution of my marriage, I relocated to a separate residence. It was an unusual experience, having previously lived with my spouse. I had never truly been independent since I had married at a young age. I have always been independent, and I was able to adapt to my new bachelor lifestyle with relative ease. In fact, I enjoyed it immensely. 2 weeks ago, my father contacted me to inform me of his intention to change his will. This was due to his desire to avoid providing for Caleb, given his previous decision to leave him nothing. In regard to Caleb, my father had kept his word. Caleb attempted to communicate with our parents and even appeared at their residence, requesting forgiveness. However, he was not permitted inside. My mother, who is typically lenient towards Caleb, also appears to have lost patience with him. It is likely that she is experiencing the greatest distress throughout this ordeal. Despite this, Caleb did not send me a single text message. He did not offer an apology for his actions, indicating that he did not regret them. Instead, he expressed sadness about being cut off from our parents. My father informed me that he would be leaving everything to me to ensure that Caleb would not protest later. He would be leaving Caleb with only $1. I was taken aback by this decision, given my father's hard-won success and the sacrifices he had made throughout his life. The assets, retirement fund, and life insurance totaled nearly $2 million. The only clause in the will was that, in the event of my father's passing before my mother, she would continue to reside in their house, despite the transfer of ownership to me. I was amenable to this arrangement, as I would have been willing to care for my mother until her final days. I am uncertain how I was informed of these developments when Caleb attempted to reconcile with me yesterday. He informed me that he had been experiencing difficulties in maintaining his studies at college. Additionally, he revealed that Karen had discovered the paternity of the child and had been persistently demanding child support from him. Caleb stated that he was financially constrained and was seeking part-time employment. Despite seeking employment, he was unable to secure any suitable positions. He implored me to intervene with our family in order to facilitate a fresh start, citing his urgent need for assistance. I responded by expressing my exasperation and reiterating that I was no longer willing to tolerate his behavior, particularly given his decision to engage in a sexual relationship with my wife and subsequently become a father to her child. Caleb attempted to justify his actions by attributing blame to me and my wife. I acknowledged his perspective but emphasized that I had initiated the divorce and that, as a result, I was no longer responsible for his actions. He had divorced her and was now responsible for her and their child, so he should not be calling me to complain about her or her child, as this was the consequence of his own actions. Cain began to raise his voice, but I interrupted him and reminded him that he was no longer the favored child in the family but the black sheep who had slept with his own brother's wife. Caleb began to cry at this point and told me how everyone had been on this, included our grandparents and other relatives, which was true, but no longer a concern of mine. I informed him that our relationship was over and that I did not wish to be contacted again, as I was no longer his brother. Since that conversation, I have repeatedly reflected on it. Despite my dislike of my brother, I had never heard him cry, at least not since we were children. I will not deny that I was somewhat hurt by his apparent helplessness, and I am seeking advice on how to proceed. He inquired as to whether I should communicate with our parents regarding him. He also asked if I would be in a disadvantageous position if I did not provide them with updates. Good day to all. Many of you have inquired as to why I have ceased communication with my son, Henry. Some of you have also referred to me as cruel. I must acknowledge that I am not at ease with the prospect of raising another man's child. This is not a situation analogous to that of a stepmother raising her stepchild. Initially, I was led to believe that Henry was my biological son. However, I subsequently discovered that he was not. I was subsequently informed that he was, in fact, my brother's son. Understandably, I experienced feelings of hurt and distress, which persisted for several days. However, the primary reason I have chosen not to maintain any form of contact with Henry is because I no longer wish to have any further involvement with Karen. If I were to communicate with her, there is a possibility that she would attempt to establish a connection with me once more. Consequently, I believe it is essential for me to have a certain degree of personal autonomy. Some individuals may perceive my actions as unkind or self-serving. Nevertheless, I am unable to envisage a scenario in which I would reconcile with him, at least not in the immediate future. It was correctly surmised that it was my mother who informed Caleb of my father's intention to alter his will. Consequently, I was contacted as a last resort. In my confrontation with my mother in the presence of my father, she became visibly distressed. She stated that I had already punished Caleb sufficiently and that he had learned his lesson. My father then informed my mother that if she considered Caleb's actions to be forgivable, then he could no longer remain married to her, as he could never. My father made it clear to my mother that if she ever spoke with Caleb again, we would discover it and she would be forced to leave him. My father is a very stubborn man, and I believe that my mother will eventually learn from her mistakes. Update 3. It has been 5 months since my last update. My relationship with my parents has improved in the last couple of months. My father and I engage in golfing activities on a weekly basis. He interacts with me in a manner that is more akin to that of a companion than that of a father. My mother, despite her longing for Caleb, has maintained a distance from him. The last communication I received regarding Caleb was from my cousin, who informed me that he had been soliciting funds from numerous individuals and ultimately had to withdraw from college due to an inability to pay his tuition fees. He and Karen are residing together, and he has secured employment as a part. It would appear that they are raising Henry together, which is a positive development. I do not discuss Caleb with my parents, and they do not bring him up either. In response to inquiries, I can confirm that I am doing well. I was promoted at my job 2 months ago, which has resulted in a significant increase in my salary. I have not been dating anyone since I feel that I require time and space to heal. I have been attending a few therapy classes, so it will be interesting to see how that progresses.